problem, KJ.
Understood.
Was understandable for this time of the year.
Right. And feel free to post questions in chat, and I can repeat the questions so that you can get your questions answered as well. But one more minute and then we'll start. Because, yeah, we had I think it was about 40 registered. So we want to go ahead and keep it. Yes. So it's now that time. So let me go ahead with introductions and then we'll go ahead and start. And I know we may have some that join a little later, but I'm happy to have Harriet Darkwa, who is the human resources leader with over 15 years experience. She is at MasterCard. And I just have to say, Harriet is just wonderful in terms of giving straight advice about the interview process and also looking at it in terms of resume and what you should have and how you should interact with industry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harriet. And I don't know if you want to start with a few remarks. Otherwise, I have some questions to start off with, and then we can also have discussion from the audience as well.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank Valerie and the entire organization, Sheila as well, for inviting me. And I always tell her that I don't know why they keep asking me to do stuff, because I do give very straight remarks. And then sometimes I say, did I just say that? Did I just tell somebody that they should stop looking for an internship and focus on their education because the GPA is not where it should be? But I do aim to be transparent. Obviously, having been in the talent space for over 20 years and being first generation and the oldest and, always really been the first, the straight talk has helped me progress. Like, I don't want to know all the stuff because that's not going to help me get to where I want to be. Just tell me exactly what I need to do and how to get there. And frankly, help me get there. And so I try to aim at that. So I hope and pray that you all will be open, ask whatever questions you think you have. Frankly, for me, there's no dumb question per se. So if it's on your mind, ask it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that, and hopefully either get it for you or just tell you maybe you want to do that on your own. But excited to be here again. Once again, thank Valerie and Sheila for inviting me, and I look forward to chatting with having a good, healthy conversation with all of you.
Yes, and just so everyone knows too, the session is being recorded, and I think that should have come up when you joined. So we are going to make available, we'll do some editing and make certain we have captioning, but we do want to make available some of these sessions as well. So just want to take note of that. But I have one question I'll start off with, and that is, when you're signing up for an interview, I guess, what are the factors that contribute to a student standing out during an interview? And I have some other questions around that, because I understand, especially, bringing up the factor around the GPA, and, what if your GPA is right at that like borderline, but how do you stand out in an interview? And then I want to ask the question too, what happens if you get stuck? But I'll save that for next.
No, great question. So how to stand out in an interview, frankly, if you've gotten to an interview process, then your resume has done its basic duty, right? Which has got you in the door. Now, the rest is you. So I guess to answer the question, I almost want to answer the question in reverse, which is, how do you kind of exit yourself from an interview or cause yourself to fail? It'll kind of answer both in both directions. I think number one, let's start with the foundational things. Be truthful in your resume and know it. So one of the things that could knock someone out of an interview in an interview is that it doesn't appear that their resume is actually what they've done. Sometimes with this resume, there are resume writing services and things of that nature, right? And you might utilize that, and you frankly the individual didn't take the time out to even read what the writer wrote. So you don't even quite know what's been placed on your resume. So I think factually to understand what's there. That doesn't mean you should use those services, but you should be, they should be walking it through with you. They should really be interviewing, transcribing what you're saying in a more thoughtful or, more articulate way. But it should be you. And beyond that, it's whatever's on your resume should be truthful. So if what's on your resume or your profile is very different than what you're saying, those are all the alarms that's going to go off. So number one, having a good solid foundation. Okay, what you say you can do, you can actually do. And if you can't do, allude to that even in your resume, moderately, familiar with, or what intermediate, or whatever the terminology is. I think one of the things is answering the question, again, I'm going basic and then hopefully you'll progress up, is answering the question as it's asked. So if an interviewer asks you, tell me about a time when you had difficult team situation. Answer a question, I recommend, in situation, action, results. Because in doing so, it allows the interviewer to follow you. I've interviewed quite a bit over the years, right? I don't actively do it as much from a requisition, but I interview people as I'm talking to them, as I'm working on the business side. And I recognize sometimes someone is saying something, you're not even quite sure what they're talking about, right? It's like, okay, so what was the situation again? What did you do? And what were the final results? So I always tell candidates, if I'm preparing them, folks I'm working with outside of work, remember what the situation is, what your specific actions were, and what the results were. So, and even with actions, we find candidates to talk about we as a group, the group did. That's great, but this is your interview. Now, again, you're going to talk about how you've partnered with people. We want to hear that. But I also want to know, okay, what were your efforts in this piece of work? If it's every question is aligned to what the group did, then, and somebody asks you, so what did you do? And you can't really answer that, that's a challenge. I would say also have basic examples that are good examples. So that means practice before you interview. There are some examples you give that are just rock solid, good. You can even sometimes you repurpose it and it'll work. So think about your past. Think about good examples that can be utilized to, talk about a difficult team situation, right? So I'll give you an example. I remember years ago, I interviewed a candidate. I forget what the question was, but it had something to do with probably something difficult or whatever. He proceeds to tell me that, he had a time when he was a New York City cab driver. I grew up in New York City. I lived in New York City for a long time. And, he had gone off duty and then he saw someone who needed help and who was trying to hail a cab, and he picked the person up, even though when you're off duty, you're not supposed to take any passengers. Now, to him, he probably saw that example from perspective of, I went above and beyond. I don't know if that was the question. And I picked up this person even when even when I wasn't supposed to. But on the flip side, how I took it was like, okay, you just proceeded to tell me that you did something illegal because based on your license, your cab license, you're not supposed to do that. So that's probably not your best example. And you need to practice to share that with someone for someone to give you that feedback back. Say, don't say that. Don't use that example. It may have a good twist to it, but that's not the best example. Okay, so practice makes perfect, right? In your interview, you get better, you become more confident as you practice. I think, so I wanted to get those foundational things that way because all these little things help, right? You think about the big bang, you have to say something remarkable, but it's not always the big remarkable questions. We get that ever so often that somebody interviews and they just wow you. it's not always like that. Majority is like, oh, that was a solid interview. I would move them forward, right? There are those wow moments, but it's not as often. But I do see a lot of people fall out of the process because of even these small things where person can't follow them. The individual is using questionable examples or situations to promote themselves. The other major challenge is when you say you don't have, like, you don't know, or you've never had a example. Now, there may be a question that you're asking, and you're saying maybe you don't have a clear example immediately. Take a second. Would you mind giving me a second? I would just love to think about that. I want to get you a good example. But never say, I don't know. Because most of these questions are not like crazy, unique questions. So that's, again, comes with the interview practice. But if you even generally, specifically, really don't have a response or an example of building the Eiffel Tower, you may not have an example of that, but you could say that, well, either something similar. And if you absolutely don't even have something similar to that, like, well, I don't have an exact example of building the Eiffel Tower, but if I were to build the Eiffel Tower, if you wouldn't mind me sharing, I would do X, Y, and Z. Because the purpose of these questions is to determine, based on your past, what can you do in the future? Like, we're trying to predict that based on past experiences, based on your really the experience you're walking with, we're trying to predict, would you be able to do X, right? Based on all the Y's that you've done. And so you have to understand that mindset of the interviewer. They're not looking to psych you out, but they need to predict, because they don't know you, they're going to work with you. They can't tell anything about you in an hour or an hour and a half interview. They're only trying to say, based on X, I think this person can do Y. And so the clearer you can make it, the more solid your interview is. But I think the times I have been blown away was a candidate, and I think because she, pretty early in her career, but she just did out of the box things. I just thought that this girl was just sick. Like, she, thought about the business, right? She had foresight into what we were doing as an organization, and she had examples of what she would do, she was just interested in things that weren't cookie cutter about our industry. Not the average person is not going to have that insight, right, into the organization, but she somehow did. And I was like, wow, like, she really went above and beyond. I think the second time that I've been blown away by someone was that she taught herself how to code, and she's a liberal arts major. And I was like, Dad, this, initiative, again, the foresight. She said, look, I'm a liberal arts student. There's so many of those. What would take me to the next level? Coding. And I just thought, man, okay. And then I'll say, lastly, having very good questions to ask, right? I think sometimes that's where it goes, wah, 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 when candidates come in and it's like, well, what questions do you have? And it's like, oh, so, can you tell me about the next steps? That is a very good question. You should ask that. But I would love to hear that, from your questions, that you've thought about the business, you thought about the role. One of the questions I like to ask when I interview is that, ask if I'm asking the person who's managing the role, if you could write a manual on you for your employees, what would that manual include? Why I'm asking that question is I want to know how you are as a leader. And frankly, do I want to work for you? And I don't want to just hear you talk about the role. I want to hear about you as the leader. And again, do I want to work for you? Would I be good for you to work for? Right? I asked that same question in a flip way. If you could build the perfect employee for this role, or the perfect person for this role, what would that look like for you? What soft and hard skills should they possess? So again, am I the right, is that individual the right fit for the role? And it gets them thinking, catches them off guard. It gives them a second to also be quizzed a bit. And it gives some thoughtfulness, at least in my opinion, to, like, I really want to know the real deal of this role and of this leadership team. So I'm hoping I answer some of your questions there, Valerie.
Yes. So I have a question from Kristen, but I want to have a follow-up with that question. Yeah. So let's say you're the interviewee and you ask a person, what would the top employee look like?
Mhm.
And they're giving you, those characteristics. Now, do you come back as the interviewee and go, I have those characteristics. Let me just give you some examples. Or, is that perceived as being, for lack of a better word, just sucking up to what they said. So, I guess I want to, I have this curiosity to go, should you add more when you learn that they're giving you characteristics that you haven't thought about, but you have, or should you leave it alone and go, okay.
I think it depends on the vibe, and how you say it. So, sorry, when I say vibe, is what the environment is or the atmosphere in the interview. You kind of can sense when it's going well or if it's not, right? And I think if it's going well or if you're comfortable and confident, I would probably say something not like, oh, I have that. No, it's like, oh, thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. And actually, this makes me even more excited about this role because I have had experiences leading a global team and leading them through trying situations. And I actually feel that that's one of my area, an area of strength for me. And I'm excited, or something that I've been, craving to do. I want to say I maybe have heard I think in my last interview for my current role, I think that might have come up if I recall correctly. And it's like, yeah, I've actually had experience building out in global environments. And that's something that I desperately want to get back into at a bigger scale. So it to your point, allows you to bring that up if it didn't come up in the interview because of, just lack of question time. But it doesn't come off like, oh, hey, hello, I got that. It flows nicely, in, again, my personal opinion, with what the person says. It's like, I'm with the person. I was listening to you. I wasn't in my head coming up with a response. I say, oh, I have that. No, like, oh, honestly, that even gets me even more excited about this role, man. I picked up some of that in the job description, but just hearing you share that really reaffirms that this may be the very exciting role for me because X, Y, and Z, right? And it also reaffirms that you are very interested in it without sounding, to your point, like you're sucking up, which frankly, I am perfectly fine with that as a candidate. Like, I'm not necessarily as an interviewer, but as a candidate, I wouldn't, depends on how you do it. I wouldn't call it second up. It can come off that way, but it's reaffirming your interest in something and your ability to do the job. And frankly, there's so many candidates, at least easily minimum, if you're on an experience level, at least 5 other candidates that are interviewed. Heck yeah, I want to tell them that I'm the right person for it. I'm just not going to say it in that way.
Right. Okay, that's great. And let me give the question too from Kristen, and that's Kristen Reed. And she asked, I'm pivoting from the medical industry into tech, but I have a large employment gap due to invisible disabilities. How do I navigate this in interviews and on my resume, applications, and LinkedIn?
So that's a really great question. And I am not the absolute expert, but I'm going to tell you what I've seen people do. And I think somebody else asked me this question in such a forum. And I said, you have to do what you're comfortable with, because it was, it's probably it was probably a tough time for you. I don't know how many years what the gap was, nor do you necessarily have to say it, but it's a tough time, right? When you're overcoming that. And so some people don't want to talk about it. And frankly, as an HR person, I don't need to know, nor am I going to peruse. Even if you say it, I'll take it as a point, but I'm not going to go down that road with you, because you can't, you frankly can't. Mm-hmm. So even how you position it you're going to have to craft something around it, because you don't also want to expose the HR person to something that can be a liability or a case for them, right, from a legal standpoint. But I do think having a story around it is helpful. I want to say there was someone I was in this type of forum with, and she had said that she had an illness or something that took her out of industry. She was getting back in, and I forget how she positioned stories, but you can say, I do have a employment gap due to medical break or medical situation or whatever the terminologies that you're comfortable with. You could even put that in your resume, right? And say, from here to here, medical break or something, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. So that it's, because I get your point. I wouldn't want to leave it there and look like you were unemployed, because that will set alarms off, right? But at the same time, I don't think it's anyone's business to get into your thing. Because I've actually had that end as well, where I don't know who I was talking to or what I was helping with, but I had a candidate share, and I personally felt she just shared too much. Like, I didn't need to know that. And it was so odd. I think I recall it being very odd to me that she was referring to, I think I asked her about something she was passionate about, and then she proceeded to share she's passionate about this, but I felt could have stopped and I could have understood where she was going without having to get me involved. But she kept going in and in and in and in. And then now what was a good stop or could have been a good story now became something that made me uncomfortable. And then I had to say, okay. And I was just like, well, thank you so very much, and went off. Now I was like, I just know now it's just too much knowledge. Now it was making me, as a human being, start questioning the other question. Because it's like, you gave me way too much information. And so I say this as a Harrietism, not representing any business, is that I think that as candidates, we should be careful that in our pursuit to connect, we don't create opportunities for people to have some level of bias. It's by nature, human beings have biases, but sometimes going too deep makes the person develop a bias without even an unconscious bias, and stir something up that you just don't want them to go down. So I would frankly tell you that practice your story. Practice with some people who are professionals in the area and say, am I giving up too much? Am I not saying enough? Put some things in the resume. Am I sharing too much? Am I not sharing enough? Right? Play with it until you're comfortable, but I would definitely make sure you're comfortable and confident, because I have seen both sides. I've seen where the person says it and it's empowering. I've seen people share information and it's like, it negates. I actually just recall a candidate who I specifically told, because I heard him share this information. And I said, look, I think you're just going way too deep. And unfortunately for him, he went back into an interview with an actual HR, with the HR person. And the person actually worked for me. And I just asked objectively, I was like, oh, so how was, the interview? She's like, I meant to tell you this was the worst interview. He did completely opposite of what I told him and just went and shared way too much, and it just frightened the HR person. And
Right. Now, how about for like the applications though? Because I know there's software out there that will toss people out for stuff like that. So how do you get past that?
Well, frankly, I don't know any good reputable companies that will be using software to toss out people who have such a situation.
Well, work gaps, not necessarily. I don't know if they look at the reason why.
Yes, you're correct about the work gaps. So I would say play with your resume and come up with something. I agree that sharing something on the resume without going into details of, employment gap due to leave, due to, you don't have to say medical leave, family leave,
Well, I also was a stay-at-home parent too, but that's
that
only.
Even if that was a portion of the time, Kristen, if I'm being frank, and I'll be honest with you, it's a fact, it's a truth. You didn't ask me how long you've been a parent as long as you've been a parent. That would be my story. I don't need to get into the other stuff. That's not anyone's business. Those things probably, if I'm banking correctly, those things probably happen simultaneously. You were probably ill while this thing happened. So why don't I share on the more acceptable of the two, the least invasive of the two, the least personal of the two, everybody, and honestly, the most respected of the two.
Okay.
I had to leave due to I had a parental leave. And frankly, so many women, so many individuals are doing that, taking leave of absence to raise their families. And it is like high five, go whoever for doing that. And that's what I'm going to use.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And here's another question related to that during the interview. If you're asked a question, let's say about working with some particular software or tool, and you're not familiar with that tool, do you just leave it and say, no, I'm not familiar with it? Do you say, no, I'm not familiar with it, but I am familiar with the following tools? Or do you say, no, I'm not familiar, but I'm a fast learner? I guess what are the good expectations to help take you to the next level? Because especially now things are so competitive.
Great question. I think it depends, right? So it depends on a couple of things. Was that tool in the job description? And if so, was it a requirement? Was it just, a preferred, not preferred, a desired skill set? So, sometimes it's in the job description. It was clearly said that maybe the HR person missed it, whatever, and didn't ask you that question. Now it's like, can you use C or C++ or Java or Linux or whatever? And frankly, if you can't, these days, I really do ask candidates to be as transparent as they can where it makes sense. Like if you can't, especially in technology, it's either you can or you can't, right? You can't pick up coding in a matter of days or weeks, right? You can't Google your way through coding. You have to do that prior to applying for a role. But I like the way you ask a question, because let's say there was a comparable software, right? So let's say it's coding language. If you can code in Java, you could probably code in, C is pretty difficult, but if you can code in Java, maybe you can code in Python. It's just a different tool. It's the practices and the principles are relatively the same. It's just apples and oranges, right? They're all fruits. It could relate. And so if that was the case, I was like, yeah, maybe the individuals say they're not an expert in Java, but they are an expert in whatever, right? And, they don't have direct experience, but they've been able to code for years in this language and, happy to, prepare and prepare for that next one. Now, I guess my feedback is that, again, if it wasn't on the job description, I'd be wondering why they're asking. So I would say, not an expert in this, but I am in this, just to validate, is this a required software or skill for this role? Because I noticed that, right? Because maybe you wouldn't have even applied. Because sometimes they ask that just because it's a nice to have and they would like it, but it wasn't strong enough to put on the job description. So they're like, oh no, I just wanted to know if you had some skills with that. I saw this project you had on it. Just assume, oh yeah. So that will kind of calm your brain. But it's like, oh no, it's a requirement. Then I'm like, well, why didn't you put that on the job description? Why didn't you say that? I mean, of course, I wouldn't say it to them, but I would just think to myself, what's going on here? You have to also recognize that, and I want to say this, that not every role is meant for you. Frankly, not just like, and it's nothing about you. Over the last years, my sister's in talent acquisition too, so we were talking. It's like we were telling someone that we knew that the company wants to hire someone as much as someone wants to be hired, if not even more. But I think you should also be strong enough, especially as an HR person. I recognize that I've interviewed for companies and didn't get it. And frankly, I walked away from the interviews like, I don't even want a role from this company. There's one particular company, very well branded company, very well known, especially in the tech space. I said I would not work for them based on the way they ran their interviews. Like, this has nothing to do with this job. Why are you asking me this? And because you as the candidate also should feel like you have expectations. Of course, you don't want to cross lines. Of course, you are looking for a role, but that doesn't mean you should like, I'll learn it. But this was never shared in the role. Maybe you would have never applied because you don't have that skill set. So I would ask like, oh, is this like a critical software in this role? If yes, then I would be thinking to myself, how did this not come up?
That's a good point.
You see? So don't also be so thirsty. At the same time, yes, be eager for a role, right? That helps, but you'll start interviewing the company and the team as well. Because I would be concerned that you didn't know you needed a Java developer.
Right.
Something's missing here.
Good point. Okay. Then let me just see if there are other questions, because I have another question related to interviews, but I'm keeping hold. Oh, okay. So Nettie, a follow-up to the question above, and this was a follow-up about the gap. Why does a gap in your resume, matter? What's the significance of seeing the gap? It could be so many different things, such as relocation, medical, personal choice. And is that really get into privacy? But what's the red flag that a gap brings up? So.
It's a great question, Nettie. And remember, life has changed since post-COVID, right? So I think some of it is lingering from pre-COVID, where frankly, if people moved around too much, there was this, years of HR. It's like if you saw someone who moved, who had a role within 3-4 years of the last, like had a couple of moves, it set an alarm that they're not stable and right? I want to say post-COVID, a lot of those things went out the door because people started putting themselves first. And we've started seeing people where there's nothing wrong with them. They're top leaders. They're good performers who just said they didn't want to. Or they want to start the baking business they've always wanted to do or have been doing on the side. Or want to take breaks or whatever. It became more acceptable to put themselves, their families, first versus work. So you have to remember the cultural shift. The cultural shift before was a very baby boomer environment. Not that that was the generation that ran the space, but that was the culture and we have to accept it. Because before, nobody thought about working from home. I mean, there are companies that I was telling my current boss about my old boss, who I call my work mom. I remember when we used to have this discussion about this work from home thing. We didn't understand why our company didn't allow it, why it was so stringent. It's like, we have these early morning, APAC meetings, and you got to come to the office at 6 a.m., take a daggone call. So we used to just talk about it. And she told me one day she went to the bathroom, and instead of coming back to her office, she had stopped by the mail office or something. And one of the HR business partners came like, "Oh, I came by your office. I didn't see you." She goes, "I went to the freaking bathroom. Okay, stop looking for me." So that was pre-COVID. Now, I mean, you can't, even coming back into the office gradually is a whole discussion. People are like, "Yeah, I work 5 minutes from the office, but I don't want to go in." That people are so much stronger now in their opinions and what they want and what they desire and what matters to them. They could literally be across the street from the office. They're like, they just don't want to. They don't want to. Right. So it's that transition also, even from an HR perspective, is still there. So you still have some feeling of, so what were you doing during that time? Right. And it does leave room for people to assume. So as that transition is happening, and my personal opinion, Harrietism, I don't think that's going to change in regards to it. A gap leaves room for people to think, so what happened there? Is it because they were let go? Is it because they're a bad employee? And people tend mentally to go to the negative than to the positive, right? So I'm also a person like let's just be practical. We can debate this all day, but practically this is the reality right now. So how do you make this work for yourself, right? Which is that address it before they create an opinion, right? But within reason. So like with the question of, I was raising, the individual's raising their family. That's it. I'm going to give you the answer before you even come up with an answer, right? So we have to remember the human psyche. This is my personal opinion. You can debate it, you can fight it, you can say it's unfair, but people are people, and the people making decisions are individuals, not machines. So they'll find a reason to say otherwise, right? Say, oh, it's because of this, but that might have also played into their decision. And I don't want that to, so I'm going to answer it as comfortable as I feel to answer it before it gets there. But again, that's a personal opinion. There's no legal stance. You could completely leave the gap there. But I'm sure some people might have declined because they saw that gap.
And let me see if there are other questions. Otherwise, I'll ask a question too about preparations. So the next question too is, what is if you can convey strategies with preparing for interviews? So you have a job description, you submitted your resume, and now you have a call, for an interview. And now I think most interviews start with a Zoom session. So and I'm not certain if yeah. And I'll add this too. With Trina that asked the question, is this also in preparation? Like, should you share a Git account, a Git, so what should you share and how do you prepare for the interview? And especially now in the virtual space.
Yeah. And I just want to say, everyone, feel free to ask and let's have a conversation. I'm not an expert per se. I've just done it for 20 years, but that doesn't mean I know any and everything. So please feel free. If other people have opinions, we love to have a conversation versus me just kind of telling you. I think what you share. So once you get the interview, preparation is key, right? So even the small things I have to say. And it's a nerve. Look, even after 20 years of giving people interviews, and I still get nervous interviewing, even though I interview people all the time. And I've interviewed probably thousands at this point. I still get my hands get clear on me sometimes. I'm like, I sit on my hands, right? I get like a little, butterflies in my stomach. So you don't get over that, right? There's nothing odd about it. But I do think some pro tips is like preparation. When are you supposed to have this interview? Set a couple of reminders for yourself, right? Make sure you got the time zones right, because especially in a global environment, right? Time zones get, mixed up, sharing GitHub. Yeah, absolutely. If you're a technical person, share GitHub. Leaders love to see, but make sure that it's a robust GitHub page and it's reflective of you and what you would want to show, like show your best self. Don't put a Git page that has like nothing on it. So recently, I was trying to help one of my colleagues had asked for us to help her with a candidate that she was trying to get filled and she wasn't getting picked up. And if we had a role, so I happened to have a role in our tech space, and I happened to see a competitor candidate. So, and who had applied for it, and I was showing my colleague, I was like, this is what your candidate's up against. I mean, this young lady had, great experience, number one, with big branded companies, right? It's a marketing, digital, tech related role. But I was like, look at her, her portfolio. It's lively, it's energetic, it's, it's visual, it's visually appealing. And it's like this candidate who was who had worked for us before as an intern, it's like, just looking at the portfolios alone, this is not exciting. This is not reflective of someone who's even has internal, information. So maybe you want to, support her and just give her feedback that maybe she can spice it up. So if you're going to use platforms that are intended to sell you before you speak, just make sure it looks the way you would want it to look, right? And I find that sometimes tech folks just put stuff up on a GitHub and that's it, but they don't look for it to be appealing. And secondly, also, sometimes there's some folks who go too far with that and they start sharing stuff on GitHub and resumes. Now people want to, it's a European thing where they'll put pictures and date of birth, but now I'm starting to see in NAM as well, North America. And don't get people in trouble. We don't need to see your picture. We don't need to know. If they want to get some information, your LinkedIn profile's there, but don't open the door for them to fall through, right? So make sure whatever you're doing reflects who you want to be. I think, frankly, to your point, Valerie, it's not even just the first round interviews that are going to be Zoom or Teams or whatever. Frankly, I don't know anybody's bringing people into the office to interview. At least I haven't heard that in a long time. And I don't think it'll go back to in-person interview unless it's at like Tapia conference where we interview on site. It's like we're already there, so we'll make the most of it. But like to fly people, the business is not going to do that anymore. Flying people in, even buying sandwiches for people to come in for an interview day is not going to happen anymore because it's just unnecessary. Frankly, it's like an unnecessary cost. Come on Zoom, do your interviews by yourself. Maybe they'll send Uber Eats or, those kind of things, and buy yourself your own sandwich and work through it. It's the best use of time for you as a candidate and the best use of time for the business. So I think you have to get more and more comfortable with the online interviews. And again, practice, right? I still think business attire is appropriate. I don't care if you're in tech, non-tech, so tech, long tech, short tech, you should be, that's my personal Harrianism, at least from the waist up. If you want to wear joggers, which I am doing personally, and some socks, which I'm doing personally, under your desk, that is fine. But above, please, I personally think business attire, it's still there. Just to Nettie's questions, no matter where the transition of life goes and things have adjusted, people still do have their notions in their minds, things they grew up with, things they did. It's acceptable. And it's not age related. There are people who are quite young, but this is how they grew up. So I aim to think of what's the most professional setting, and I would say lean in towards that versus, just being super casual. Even if the interviewer is wearing t-shirt and jeans, that doesn't mean that's what you should. I don't subscribe to that at all. Cause I've seen managers like, I can't believe you came in with the t-shirt and jeans. They're wearing t-shirt and jeans, but they don't expect the candidate to do that. Right? Unless it's specifically told. I used to work for a startup and for a short time where they specifically told people, do not wear, business attire for your interview. So when I interviewed with them, I wore business casual. I wore a blouse and slacks, but I wasn't going in there with t-shirt and jeans. I was like, I'm sorry. That's not what I grew up doing. I'm not going to do that. So I think still prepare yourself from a attire perspective. So practice looking, in the direction of the camera, do simple things like shut down your computer before, like the night before, to make sure you don't have any updates, like prepare. But as for technical virtual interviews, you're going to have to totally get used to it. Because I don't think we're going to go back to like, well, I'm an in-person person. That's probably not going to happen. That's
Right.
probably not going to happen.
And when you said practice, I guess, should you practice like with a friend, another student, where you're saying, okay, if you ask me this question, here's how I would answer. Tell me how that's perceived. I'm thinking it's perceived as this positive. Do you see any negatives? So is that the practice that should be done, or if you can elaborate on the practice? And then I'll get the question from KJ, who's in the library.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, if you can, practice with a interviewing professional, because sometimes practicing with a friend, your friends say, "Oh yeah, that's cool," and it's like, no, they don't know what they're talking about. They're probably as blind as you are, right, about that. So I would say practice with a professional, right? You have career services departments at your schools. You have, the top of your organization, the CMD-IT group, right? Like practice with someone who this is their wheelhouse, if you can. And then, frankly, if you have to have a friend, fine. And you can practice with them and say, do I look okay? Watch videos. Amazon does a great job of putting a lot of, interviews up that you can review. You can watch a few different types of videos to get comfortable. And sometimes just you record yourself. Some people do that, which I think is very helpful. I recently heard myself in a recording and I realized, oh, shoot, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore because I could hear this and I didn't like how that sounded. So you don't always know what you say or how you say it. So I think practicing, even recording stuff, could be very helpful and very powerful. You can start to see things that you do that you don't recognize. I know there are some people who interview and they do a lot of this, and I speak with my hands, but it, could be distracting. Some people twitch. I mean, some people do things that they consciously are not aware of. It's not a disorder or anything. They just are not aware of. Some people play with their hair in interviewing because they're nervous. So recording yourself could be actually quite powerful to observe those little things that you do that you're not aware of that you would like to change.
Harriet,
Yes.
usually when people interview, they shouldn't play with their hair because it makes the interviewer thinks they're weird.
That could be a point. Well, it is a nervous reaction, right? Sometimes people are nervous, and that's what they do.
Like, it's okay to be nervous, but you really shouldn't show it.
You should try your best, but unfortunately, we're all human beings, and we all get nervous, right? Some use filler words, some play with their hair. It's fine and it's normal, but watching yourself, you may recognize it, and you could quickly change it because you'll be conscious of it, right? So that's another way to practice.
Yes, and I have a question here from KJ. She has, as a current junior in college with no side projects so far, what would you recommend to highlight on a resume? I have highlighted my best academic projects, clubs that I'm a part of, and volunteer experience for the time being, but would appreciate any advice. Although different factors are considered for first-time internships versus full-time roles, how have you or other interviewers considered side projects of candidates? How important do you find them?
So, great question. I think experience, early career talent people would recognize that not everyone has an opportunity, especially when you're a junior. Has an opportunity to get an internship. Though I would 100% push for folks to get an internship, even if it's unpaid, just to get that experience under your belt, if you can. I think you want to heighten your research projects. I think you want to make yourself available. I think sometimes people underestimate volunteering themselves to a small business, right? And doing projects for them, or a not-for-profit, or a family member. I know someone who helped their parents, small store business and use that as a project. And so I think yes, you may not have gotten this traditional, applied for Google, got a Google internship or a MasterCard internship, right? But I think especially as the spring, you still have the spring semester, you could also volunteer yourself, teach other people coding, right? Because what you're looking for is a couple of things, especially in an early career framework, is the experience, right? So that can either come from a direct internship, which is traditional and is great, and right, we do recognize and support it. It could come from projects. School projects are are totally fine, especially if you can articulate it really well and present it really well. But sometimes you'll see it can be undermined because all you do is blah, blah, blah project in class 101. That doesn't sound exciting. It sounds like something you just had to do, or you felt you were forced to do to get a grade. But if you position that, you worked on a robotics project, right? Creating a robot with, or some type of AI project, right? And you articulate it really well, it can really wow the interviewers, right? Your leadership experience is something else that people are looking for. Are you a leader on campus? So if you're not getting the internships, you're not working while you're in school, then what else are you doing, right? Because not only are we looking for people, yeah, it's great if you have a 4.0, but I frankly have declined a 4.0 candidate before because he was not well-rounded. I want a well-rounded person. When you bring them into the corporate environment, they're not a fish out of water, right? They have, got some grit. They worked at Starbucks, right? And understood high level of customer, service, how to get my very unique, mocha cafe latte, extra hot, light on the whip with a small drizzle order and in 2 minutes. And extra hot means piping hot, right? If you can do all that and a smile and you conversing with me, asking me about my children, because I've come there enough, that to me tells more than you got a 4.0, you got all A's in class. That means you know the book. But how do you apply that book into the real world? So think about it from that perspective. How you can apply things to the real world can come into many different shapes and sizes. You don't only have to do traditional, even though traditional is fine and it works and it's good. If you don't have that, what else can you do? What else can you do to show that you have that skill set?
Right. And I think too, and here was Trina, who's a CS200 software engineering professor. And I guess, Trina, if you want to provide your comment that you noted in the chat.
Sure. So, like I said, I teach software engineering, and to help students with that silent, dead time sometimes that you can have in interviews, that technical interviews, because the moment you mention an interview, they just freak out. I tell them, have one of your projects available where you can talk about the things that you did on the project, and like you said, practice. Just because I know what you did doesn't mean the interviewer is going to understand. So be able to talk about everything, things you did and things you didn't do that maybe someone else did that you like to get a chance to do. Is that good information to give to my students? Is that good advice?
I absolutely, especially around the projects. Like I said, I think you articulated really well, right? Is that, Trina, that the projects carry weight. Now, I think where students get caught up is that should you get an internship? Yes, that is the more surefire way to prove that you have experience because it's practical work, right? But you'll be surprised how many software development interns who have internships who don't know how to code. I've had my team has had folks who worked at NASA. I would have put money that if you're coding at NASA or you have a software engineering title at NASA, they have never touched code. Never. They have the title. They sat and did some paperwork. They attended a bunch of meetings. They actually never coded. So now as we've gone through this cycle, especially in the last year or so, where we saw a lot of that in the last year cycle, we are pushing to see what projects. And that's where the GitHub site came in, because I had one of my directs had a debrief, and one of the interviewers is like, can we ask for a GitHub site? And I said, well, tell me more. Why do you want to have that? He says, I want to see beforehand that they actually know how to code. Like, what I want to see your project work. Because these titles, he's like, Harry, some of these guys, they have all the right titles with all the right companies, but they actually never code. So we spend all this time interviewing them to only find out, like, they don't know the basic, they don't know data structures or algorithms. They don't know the basics. So I think you're absolutely right. Where can you show that you actually know how to do work? Even if that means doing extra projects with your professor. Unfortunately, we also have students who are into software because it is the IG career. And what I mean by IG or Instagram or the gram career is that it's the job that people get on Instagram with, doing selfie videos and saying that, if you want to make 6 figures in 6 months, right, post-graduation with a bachelor's degree, go into computer science. So they don't have a love for it. They have a love for the salary. So the ability to do a little bit more or to show their enthusiasm or extra, their excitement for the industry is not there. And it's more difficult because they don't actually want to be developers. They just want the developer salary.
Unfortunately, working in medical, I saw that with some medical professionals too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. My husband's in medical. He says it all the time that people love medical because of 312s, right? Or 224s. The schedule is really nice. The comp is really good. So he says, you'll be surprised how many medical people don't actually like patients. Yeah, he said he had doctors all the time, especially during COVID. Doctors that would not go into the hospital room. He said they would be scared out of their mind.
Wow. So
you can tell though, because it shows in their patient care a lot.
Exactly.
Yes. And we have one more question. I know we have just about 3 minutes, and that is if you could talk about the difference between an internship versus a regular job. as well in terms of the factors that you consider with
Right.
applicants for an internship versus a job.
Okay, so an internship versus a job in regards to how we consider applicants. I think the biggest difference between the two is, I think it's the business's expectations for the internship. Albert, just give me 1 second, okay? And I think that, or more than a second, pardon me. I think that when I say this, I'm going to say two things at the same time. It's going to seem counterproductive, or it's going to seem like an oxymoron, but it's not. We have obviously a higher level of expectation for the full-time role, because this is in our mind, it's a forever thing, right? We expect you to be there forever and ever. Amen. Even though now, obviously, that storyline is changed a bit, but at least for a significant amount of time. Let's put it that way. So the investment, the expectation is much higher for them than it is maybe slightly for an intern. But what that means is that it's not that we don't expect the intern to be good. No, maybe they're willing to bend a little bit where it may feel that, okay, maybe they're on the fence a little bit. They might be more willing to go over on the positive side of the fence and give that person a chance as an intern, because at the worst, at the most, if this person, if their slight is correct, it's 10 weeks, it's 12 weeks, it's 16 weeks, and you can just call it over. Whereas the full-time, that's not how it is, right? You can't just easily say, all right, well, you're fired. That's not, it actually takes a lot to let someone go, even if they're not performing well. It takes a lot of effort, right? It's not something businesses do easily. And so they're a little tougher with the full-time. The expectation is much higher because this is an impactful thing for the business and for that person. This is their career. An internship is a career, but there's, an end to it. And so on the positive side, they may give a little bit extra chance. The other thing is that our expectation is higher on the full-time candidates because you're older in the sense of career-wise or academic career. So you're a senior. You should know this by now. Why don't you know the basics of computer science? Why are you asking me some of these questions? You've been in this space a lot longer than someone who just is in their second year. So the expectation is that you have exposed yourself while you're in university, whether that's on the academic angle, whether that's in clubs and leisure. That's why I said that well-rounded nature is so critical, right? It's like, no, you've been around the block a little bit. So were you just standing there? There's an expectation that you involve yourself, right? You try just a little bit. It's your career. You just give yourself a little bit of a chance. The time of sitting back and waiting, I don't think that ever existed, but I would tell you that the excuses don't land well, even on the internship side. Businesses want people who are, except practically can work, because when you flip over to the career side, it's not about the book. You can Google a lot of things. It's the interpersonal skills. It's the ability to work with teams. It's the ability to overcome challenges. All these things that, as one leader said to me, you can't teach, right? It comes through experiences, and exposure, and you get better as you go along, and you can teach some aspects of it, but it's much harder to teach is what they're also looking for. So the expectations are higher from the full-time perspective, and maybe rightly so, right? You've been at it a bit longer.
Thank you. So with that, we are at our time. Actually, we're a little beyond our time, which was great. So we so enjoyed your comments and candid answers to questions. I so appreciate it, Harriet. And I get so much feedback going, thank you from others that participate. So with that, I want to say thank you to Harriet in terms of giving us feedback and answering questions. And also thank you to our participants for this session, for our webinar for December. And so I want to go ahead and conclude with a warm thank you and also a happy holidays to everyone, to you and your families. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Sheila. And thank you all. Have a great week.
You
Thank
too.
you.
And a
Thanks,
much thank you
Harriet.
in-
Bye.
Bye. In the
Bye.
chat too. There's a lot of thank
Oh,
yous.
thanks everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Cheers.